Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we're going to briefly discuss Brazil during the dictatorship, right? The military regime from 1964 to 1985. Now, as you saw in previous discussions, in 1964, many countries of Latin America turned to military dictatorships. Why? Because democracy is messy, number one. It is. If you have kids and you say, okay, I have 3 kids, for example, where do you want to eat for dinner? They all have their own opinions. But if you say, well, this is a dictatorship, this is where we're going, take it or leave it, it's much easier. So when the United States said that we care more about our twin pursuits of trade and security than liberty and justice for all, then many countries said, okay, then we're going to turn to a military dictatorship to try to solve some of the problems of the past. And you're going to see this in just a second. So Brazil, 1964, overthrew, the military did, the constitutional president and João Goulart, and instituted a military regime. A series of military dictatorships will ensue that lasts until, if you can see down here, 1985. João Figueiredo being the last of them. But see, what happens then is if you say, this is where we're going to dinner, folks, well, then they're going to have to do it. So you can choose to make the cheapest place possible to eat. So what happens here is that by focusing now, the military regime, on exports at the expense of development, individual concerns, they're going to increase the economy. This is called the economic miracle. Economically, they concentrate on controlling inflation, accelerating the growth rate. Remember, growth is not the same as development. 1969 to 1974, then, you're going to see a phenomenal growth rate. Economic growth of 10%. That is considered, historically, the economic miracle. That's great. The country at large is doing very, very good. So you're going to do this by focusing on exports. After 1964, larger states tended to grow both in size, but also in efficiency. See, what you have is these big, larger states. It's not possible always to use all of the land on a larger state, but it's yours. Foreign investment rose and dependency deepened. So in other words, like I keep saying, Brazil grew, but it did not really develop. There was no progress for the individual person. Brazilian generals looked to industrialization, however, to solve their dependency and economic problems. So if we are dependent on exports, perhaps maybe we need to have more industrialization. So, for example, we got growth without development up here, and then we have a great example. Now, this example is more. I'm using this example because I live in Lancaster, South Carolina. And Lancaster, South Carolina used to have, a couple of years ago, a great industry called springs. Most of the textiles, one of the biggest textile industries in the world. However, it all went to Brazil 7 years ago. 8 years ago. Anyway, it all went to Brazil. Why? Because they're going to be able to industrialize by bringing these companies into their country and taking advantage of cheap labor. Now, this is a modern example, and we're talking about the military dictator. But there's lots of other great examples during the dictatorships as well, where they say, well, we got to find some way to focus on industrialization. But when you're focusing more on export than industrialization, no matter what you do, it's not going to truly solve the problem. You just become a different form of dependent. Okay, so land monopoly. In 1988, less than 5%. Now, this is just after the military dictatorship, but it's still indicative. 5% of landowners controlled more than 66% of cultivable land. That means they were exporting agriculture but importing food. And that is going to lead to a rise in the price of food, which is then going to lead to people not being able to buy enough food to eat. Malnutrition is a result. In 1980, they were having to import $1.8 billion in food that they could have grown in-house. That led to 64% of the population being malnourished with a 1984 estimate. That's the Brazilian government itself that's saying that 64% of our population is malnourished. We've got to do something about that. Now, the reason being, in a great book about the United States, which could be applied to Brazil, was called Nickel and Dimed. I think it was a great book. I can't remember exactly who wrote it, but it's a wonderful book. And it talks about how it's impossible to eat healthy on a minimum wage. You just can't do it. So what people will do is, let's say you go to the store. When I was in Brazil, I remember this very strongly. You go to Brazil and water costs $1. But a tubaína or a little soda pop costs 10 or 20 cents. What are you going to do? Buy a big old water, no calories, or buy a little soda pop for 20 cents with 600 calories. So people are malnourished, but they're becoming obese. One of the things that's interesting is that obesity is a problem of poverty. You don't think that is the case, but it is the case because of empty calories, because they will fill you up. Okay, so inflation began in the 1980s, 230% annually. By the time I was living there in the early 1990s, inflation was completely out of control. Rising costs of imported oil also dealt the economy a staggering blow. Deeper fuel costs. Brazil became deeper and deeper in debt. I always hated it because I like it when it's nice and cool. When you go in someplace and they have this great air conditioner, but they don't turn it on because the energy costs are too expensive. Okay, so Brazil is getting deeper and deeper in debt. How do you pay for these debts? You increase exports. How do you increase exports if you're already tapped out? Well, you, just like if you guys are in debt, maybe you say, maybe I should, instead of focusing on buying less, maybe I should get another job. That's what they're doing. Get another job by opening up the Amazon and the West. First, they open up Brasilia, a new capital. It officially opens up in 1960, building roads to get there, and then encouraging exploitation of the land all around the new capital of the interior, but especially the Amazon rainforest. By the time I was in high school, 160,000 square miles of rainforest had disappeared. That was one of those things we learned, and we talked about the disappearance of the rainforest. What's going on? In 1988 alone, according to one textbook that I read, and there's some great books out there, what is it? The Axe and the Firebrand is a wonderful book. Destroyed 6 million acres, 3.5 million left by 1991. That means a lot of the acreage of the rainforest is simply being destroyed, leaving the soil useless. You chop it down, you burn the the trees for charcoal, and then you sell it to, I don't know, Pittsburgh or someplace where they can make steel, and then you grow crops on the rest of the land. It leaves the soil useless, and so it's not going to be beneficial for very long. A lot of the Indians, from the time of Cabral, they had been going farther and farther inland. Well, what are they going to do now, right? Because now it's the end of they can't run any farther. Just like in the United States in the 1870s, right? We had the mopping up operations of the Indian Wars. Here is going to be the same thing. What are the Indians going to do? So they start fighting back against the encroaching ranchers, the loggers, the miners, but especially what they establish is the largest social movement, peasant movement in Latin America or in the world, which is the Movimiento Sem Terra, landless peasant movement. So they fight back. Poor immigrants with large landowners. See, what happens is that they have no land anymore. So they go into an area of land, as you kind of see here, and they just sit there. They squat. And then the landowners will come and say, you got to get out. They'll say, we're not going to get out. And then the bullets start to fly. Thousands of people are going to be killed. Thousands of those people are Indians. Now, this is not just an indigenous movement. It's also a landless movement, because that's a big deal. Well, now they're getting smarter, and they bring the media with them, so it becomes an international problem, because people will get killed, but then it'll be recorded on a video camera and then uploaded to CNN. Divided into 180 tribes, 200,000 to 250,000 Indians are left by the end of this century. They are largely landless. That is the end of their frontier. What are they going to do? A lot of great books have been written about this recently. The hunting question. How can you extract some of this great wealth out of the Amazon without destroying the ecology? If I could ever get a great job, well, I have a great job, okay? But if I could get a dream job, I would still do what I was doing, but I would have 100 acres and I would use it as a tree farm, right? So that I could replenish the environment at the same time, and that's what they should do. All right, but it's difficult, by the way, because a lot of the large landowners are foreigners, especially, let's say, Hershey's and Nestle for cacao, so we can have these great chocolate fixes in the middle of the daytime, right? All right, so it goes from in the economic miracle then, 1969 to 1974, marked an increase by 10% of the economy. But after this increase, it stops and they see themselves deep in debt. Evidently, it seems for many people, it is not solving the problem. Well, the economic problem. Ernesto Geisel, when he was when he was the president, he selected General Figueredo to be the next successor. So he's going to be the next military dictator. Well, in March of 1979, taking presidency, he says, you know what? The military dictatorship, it's about time for us to step down and to return to a democracy. I intend to turn this country into a democracy. I hold out my hand in conciliation. So that period in which it was a military dictatorship is now going to turn back to a democracy. And this is one of the points that I want to make, that in Latin America, around 1985, the Latin American countries that had turned to military dictatorships realized that even if they did have a small economic miracle, it is time to return to a democracy, and they turn back to a democracy. Okay, that is the example of Brazil, super-duper quick, and the military dictatorship in less than 15 minutes.